pressure continues to be normal.
The chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll with Linux.
Water towers can fly!
Echo Delta nominal.
Flight outside SC off. Say again, SC off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a live view of Launchpad 0A at the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia, where a Northrop Grumman Antares 230 rocket is getting ready to launch the NG-18 mission, the Cygnus cargo resupply spacecraft to the International Space Station. We're just about 47 minutes away from today's planned T0, an early morning launch from the east coast of the United States, resupplying the expedition on board the ISS. My name is Thomas Burkhart, News Director for NASASpaceflight, offering some commentary for this morning's launch. And of course, in chat, I'm already getting messages saying that you can hear me with the 5x5, so much appreciated. It will not be just me here on commentary this morning. We'll be taking your questions, providing updates throughout the countdown and the launch. And joining me to do so is Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor of NASASpaceflight. Chris, how you doing this morning?
Doing absolutely fine. How about yourself, Thomas?
I'm doing well. It's an early morning, but we got an extra hour of sleep, so I think we'll be all right. And also joining me on comms is Sawyer Rosenstein. Sawyer, how are you doing this morning?
That extra hour nap definitely helped, so we're doing great and ready for Antares to take flight.
This is an Antares rocket, and of course, whenever we see this rocket go, we know we are seeing it launch some cargo to the International Space Station. That is its job. This is the second of the two cargo spacecraft that service the ISS from the United States here, alongside the SpaceX Dragon vehicle, of course. And want to give us just a quick overview, Chris, of today's mission and perhaps maybe a milestone for the Antares rocket?
Yes, indeed. So today is pretty much the second to last or penultimate flight of the Antares 230 variant rocket that you see here on the pad. The rocket will undergo quite a major change, getting an entirely new first stage here coming up in the next few months. But before we go completely into that, let's talk about the mission at hand today, which is just over 45 minutes away from liftoff here at Pad 0A at Wallops in Virginia. This is the NG-18 mission of the Enhanced Cargo Cygnus Resupply Vehicle to the International Space Station. Packed on board this particular Cygnus for NASA is approximately 3,700 pounds of science. It's approximately 3,700 pounds of science experiments, crew supplies for the International Space Station. Some of this includes a new 3D printing facility for biological printing of human exposure. Zimbabwe and Uganda's first satellites are on board as CubeSats for deployment later. In the mission, there's also a microgravity influence experiment on ovary function. And then also how plants can undergo and adapt to microgravity and how their experiences can be transmitted through seeds to the next generation is also a neat experiment on board. As is a solid propellant experiment from the NASA Glenn Research Center for solid fuel ignition and extinction and a materials test as well. So this is a really good testbed for those types of things as well. So that is what is underway here. All of that is scheduled to lift off within a 5-minute launch window that opens at 5:50 Eastern Standard Time, 10:50 UTC, which would result in a rendezvous with the International Space Station for Nicole Mann to reach out with Canaveral and grapple Cygnus and then berth it to the Unity module of the station. Today, this Cygnus, as always happens with Northrop Grumman, they name them after influential people in the space industry. And this particular Cygnus vehicle, NG-18, is named after NASA astronaut Sally Ride, who became the first American woman in space on board Challenger's STS-7 mission, and then flew another flight aboard the Challenger before retiring from the astronaut corps and also serving on the Challenger Disaster Commission, investigating that accident and return to flight. Sally Ride very sadly died about 10 years ago from pancreatic cancer, and Northrop Grumman honoring her with a namesake for the Cygnus resupply vehicle for the International Space Station today.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And like we said, a milestone for not just Antares, but Cygnus as well. And of course, the Sally Ride honor as well.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me. I said we would come back to it, and then I almost forgot to there. Yeah, penultimate flight of Cygnus, which might sound weird. Sorry, penultimate flight of Antares, which might sound weird because Antares lives to see another day in a very radical variant. So Antares has already had an upgrade to its current 230 plus variant when it switched from Aerojet AJ26 engines on the first stage, which were basically modified NK-33 engines from the Soviet era, and it switched after a failure in October 2014, a launch failure shortly after liftoff that nearly caused a pad fallback of the Antares. It barely missed the pad as it fell back. And they switched over to the RD-181 engine. So there are two of those on the base of the vehicle, and here comes the reason why there's a whole bunch of change. So the RD-181 is a Russian engine, and the first stage of Antares is actually built in Ukraine, both of which now become slightly problematic given the Russian invasion of Ukraine earlier this year and the supply chain disruptions within that country. So this is going to be the second to last flight of the Antares 230 variant that you see on the pad. The next one will launch the NG-19 mission, and then this version of the rocket will retire. And Northrop Grumman has actually partnered with Firefly Aerospace to develop a completely new first stage for the Antares based on Firefly hardware and engines that will give a little bit more performance overall to the rocket. Initially, the same second stage, the Castor 30 XL solid propellant stage, will be used on this new Antares 330 variant, is what the Firefly variant will be called. And then eventually they will switch over to a liquid-fueled upper stage, which will provide a little bit more performance and some slightly different fairings as well, and that will be called the Antares 330 variant. So in the interim, before that particular rocket is ready to take over the reins from Antares 230, the NG-20, 21, and 22 missions of Cygnus are all set to launch on a SpaceX Falcon 9 from Cape Canaveral in Florida, before the idea being that 23 would then shift back to an Antares 330 rocket launching from Virginia.
Yeah, there you go. And actually, following the 330 with the first stage upgrade, which is that Firefly first stage, previously known as Beta, but they're kind of transitioning towards, it's kind of evolved from what Beta was originally going to be. And so now they're kind of, we're calling it the medium launch vehicle. And Northrop Grumman has said, we'll name it something else later. But with that new upper stage too, it'll basically be a brand new rocket. But with some evolutions in there to support things like reusability and things like that. Kind of in the same payload class and maybe market as Neutron from Rocket Lab. It's sort of in that medium lift range, but incorporating some reusability aspects and things like that.
Which could honestly make it a bit more palatable for some of the other domestic and government missions that Antares so far has really been overlooked for because there have been cheaper or better, more powerful alternatives. I do just want to correct one slight thing that I said. I used the incorrect measurement unit earlier. It's 3,700 kilograms of payload headed up to the International Space Station, not miles. Not oh Jesus.
Oh, gee, miles of cargo. That'd be impressive.
I'm doing really good at 5 a.m. here. Not pounds. My apologies on that one, but 3,700 kilograms of cargo inside the Cygnus vehicle today.
No worries. Sounds good though.
Miles, jeez.
All right, right. I do have some questions already coming in the chat. I don't even know if I got to say this at the beginning, but if you do have questions about today's stream or today's launch, please tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat. And I'm already starting to pull some of those in. We also got some super chats and things, and I want to thank the people who send support our way. Musical Wolves providing some for the Daylight Savings Fund. I don't know what the purpose of a Daylight Savings Fund, but I appreciate it.
Is that like go back to sleep,
Yeah,
get
yeah.
a second hour? Like,
Yeah, I don't know, but appreciate it. Starship 24 with some super chats as well. Appreciate it. Hangtime Central became a red team member. Appreciated. And then we got a question here from Musical Wolves. So it says, how many launches has Wallops had this year, and will we see more launches from Wallops next year? If I'm not, so here's the thing. Of course, the thing with Wallops is there's a bunch of suborbital launches. They've launched sounding rockets a bunch of times. I believe this is only the second orbital launch from Wallops this year. Is that right?
I believe you are correct. I'm going to have the added Sawyer correct both of us if we're wrong. I believe you're right,
Yeah.
Thomas. I think the only previous orbital launch was the NG-17 mission of Cygnus earlier this year on a previous Antares. But you are exactly right, Thomas. The tricky part of answering that question is Wallops does a lot more launches than people actually are really realizing, because they're not very public events, but a lot of suborbital sounding rockets really do launch from Wallops into the upper atmosphere. So it's a little bit hard to give that number off the top of the head, but I do believe you're right. Second orbital flight from here.
Correct. That is the second orbital flight. And then to answer also the part of next year, that number will go up as it's scheduled for at least later this year, if not early next year, that Rocket Lab will begin flying their Electron rocket out of Wallops as well.
Which you can actually see the pad in this shot. So Antares and Cygnus are centered, and then you see the water tower. And if you look, you see the 4 red lights on the lightning protection towers around Antares, and then you see 4 lights on the medium rung of the water tower going down in elevation. And then just below to the left of and then to the right of the water tower below it, you see another set of 2 lights on much, much smaller towers. That's the Electron launch pad.
It is. If
Electron
it
is really
wasn't,
that small. Like,
yeah, if it wasn't very dark right now, we would have a better visual of it. But yeah, it's right there. And like Sawyer just mentioned, Rocket Lab planning to launch from there as early as this December. And then basically once they are approved to do that first launch, they should have the capability to pretty much jump right into the same sort of launch cadence that they have from their New Zealand pads. So likely an uptick in orbital launches overall by the time we're counting up the launches at the end of next year. And that is even though, like you mentioned, there are only this and one more Antares rocket slated right now before there'll be a bit of a gap while Cygnus flies on Falcon 9 until the new Antares rocket is ready. So there'll be a gap in Antares, but Rocket Lab will pick up the slack as far as Wallops orbital launches for a bit. But of course, lots of suborbital launches. Also, occasionally we get those Minotaur launches from Wallops, maybe once a year or so. There was one last year. I don't think there's one planned this year, but anyway.
There's a Black Brant 9 sounding rocket left this year, and then next year they'll be trying out some new improved Mes Orion is the name of the mission, because they're supposedly improved Orion sounding rockets.
There you go. Thank you, Sawyer.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm going to bring in some other questions here. We got one here from Blake. Oh, this is a very important question. I would like to know the answer to this one. Is Thanksgiving dinner on board this resupply mission? We all know that they usually send up a pretty impressive Thanksgiving dinner to the ISS crew. Wondering if that's on board today's flight.
It is either on this one, or it would have been on one of the previous ones that lifted off, and some follow-ups might be on the SpaceX CRS-26 cargo resupply that's set to launch 12 days from now as well. But yes, there's almost certainly some of the Thanksgiving and holiday meals on board the Cygnus as well. Cygnus is also likely, because it's Cygnus and CRS-26 very close to one another here in November, they also both likely have the Christmas gifts and holiday gifts for the crew aboard the International Space Station as well. Yes.
Awesome.
And if nothing else, it's extremely likely that you're going to at least get some perishables like fresh fruit and things that Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get on board the station. They usually will throw in some apples and oranges and other fresh
Yes.
things depending on the season too.
And what I absolutely love about this, I don't think NASA has it, but the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, NASA's counterpart in Japan, when they are launching the HTV resupply vehicle up to the International Space Station, they literally have something called the Fresh Fruit Selection Committee that chooses the pieces of fruit that go up on the HTV. Yes.
That's hilarious.
How do you get that job? I want in.
I know,
Yeah.
right?
Alex,
The images of the committee are exactly what you would expect to. Like,
Alex Plant, thank you for becoming or upgrading, excuse me, to the Capcom level of the YouTube membership program. Much appreciated. Hope you enjoy your perks, and we appreciate the support. Goes a long way to helping do what we do here. Here's a question from Ches, a rocket question. Why does today's launch have a 5-minute launch window when most launches to the ISS have instantaneous windows?
ooh, I really like this question
Yeah.
because most launches to the International Space Station have windows. The rocket performance then constrains you to instantaneous. So when Falcon 9 lifts off to the International Space Station, and we always say it's instantaneous because of Falcon 9's performance margins and fueling processes, but there's actually a window involved, and the Antares rocket, the Atlas V rocket as well, can make use of those windows because of the extra performance the rocket has and the steering capabilities within the launch plane to actually get the vehicle into the proper plane, as well as Cygnus's propulsion afterward to do some orbital maneuvers. So Antares actually can launch anywhere within the 5-minute launch window because the rocket itself can the count can be held very late in the countdown and still provide for a liftoff without a large recycle. Falcon 9 would have to recycle, and that is what sort of makes that window instantaneous. Now, Soyuz launch windows to the International Space Station are instantaneous because Soyuz is trying to hit a very, very, very precise orbital target to get Soyuz in progress to the International Space Station within 3 or 6 orbits, or sometimes even two to 4 orbits. And that then mandates an instantaneous launch window of the Soyuz because of the orbital target you're trying to hit. But because Cygnus can take up to 7 days to actually phase with the International Space Station, it can make use of the entirety of the window. But technically, Falcon 9 also has a 5-minute launch window. They just can never use it because of the rocket performance in flight.
And for those of you who already have your bingo cards up and early this morning, the shuttle typically had approximately, I believe, 10-minute ISS launch window. And again, all to do with vehicle
Yes.
performance, which good news they did because they had to use it on the final shuttle flight, STS-135, back in 2011.
Yes, and the space shuttle actually had additional on-orbit performance from those really, really powerful orbital maneuvering system engines. And on certain days of its launch periods to the station, they could actually extend that window from 10 minutes to 14 minutes and give Flight Day 4 rendezvous with the station instead of Flight Day 3. So the shuttle had even more flexibility when they needed it. For rendezvous, but yeah, windows ultimately just come down to what can the rocket do once it lifts off, and that gives you when you lift off. Yeah.
So there we go. Proof that rockets use Windows, not Macs.
Oh, jeez. So you're in top form
Fantastic.
this
So
morning.
aired.
Much
Yes.
appreciated.
Thank you.
So I'm going to throw you this question here. We got one from Paul saying, what is the status of ESA or JAXA resupply capability for the International Space Station?
Ooh, that's a good question. So we have the two vehicles that were from each. We had the ATV from ESA, and then the one that you were just talking about from JAXA as well, the HTV. I believe the ATV has been mostly retired at this point, unless I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah,
and
ATV has been retired for a while now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only component of it that lives on is as part of the service module for the SLS, but
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
ATV is done. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the HTV, it's actually getting a slight upgrade. And as I was just informed here in the back channel today,
Oh, no way.
conveniently,
No way, that's amazing. Yeah.
you'll be doing a static fire test ahead of the flight of the HTV-X.
I
Yeah,
didn't.
So
so
Somehow I missed
HTV.
that entirely. So shout out to thanks, Alex.
Yeah, like I totally missed that that the H3 rocket, which is the new rocket needed for HTVX and some other missions, is doing a static fire today out at Tanegashima and is actually rolling out. And has rolled out to take its launch pad. So that's a wonderful overlap of the question there.
yeah,
There you
so
go.
JAXA's first launch attempt of that is scheduled for, I believe, no earlier than January of 2024, although they will be testing out the rocket it will fly on ahead of that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So JAXA's getting back in the ISS resupply game too.
there
And
we
and
go.
it's worth noting there that why did ESA stop and JAXA is still going? This is all part of sort of the initial round of contracts for the International Space Station of what the international providers were agreeing to do on their own some in exchange for, hey, we'll do X number of resupply missions, and NASA launched that module for us, and no money is exchanged between the agencies, right, for those types of things. Sometimes agencies like JAXA continue to do those resupply missions in exchange for more seats, more crew time on board the International Space Station. So there's all sorts of trade-offs as to why one partner ceases to do something and another continues, that are just all part of the how it all operates together in the most efficient way. And the basic element of it is we only need 3 resupply vehicles for the US segment of the station, of which ESA and JAXA and Canada are part. And we can basically fulfill that with Dragon, Cygnus, and HTVX. So there was no reason for ATV from Europe to continue.
However, they are adding the Dream
Hmm.
Chaser to that rotation, potentially as early as next year. So there's that as well. So there'll be
Indeed.
3 American vehicles plus the Japanese vehicle. And that actually ties in with our next question here. I want to continue this discussion because Westy asks, how often realistically are resupply flights needed for the ISS? So we talked about Antares. This is the second Antares Cygnus mission of the year. I believe we're expecting Cygnus to pretty much continue flying twice a year, even as it transitions launch vehicles. You'll have Dragon, which flies 2 to 3 times a year, depending on the year. You have Dream Chaser coming online as early as next year. You have HTVX coming up in a couple of years. And you also have, of course, when you add the other segment of the ISS, the Russian Progress vehicle, which flies, again, about twice a year or so. Is that is that a pace that we don't expect to change? Is that something that could change if we start crewing the station more significantly? Like, think how when the Axiom modules start launching and things like that. Is that a number that might change going forward?
That's a great question, specifically to that latter part there, Thomas. Overall, if you discount the Axiom flights, right, the commercial missions that stay at the station to do science, if you sort of remove them from the equation here, we do not expect the overall cadence of resupply to change, because there will just normally be 7 people up there, and the balance is sort of good. What we might see is how often some of these particular craft fly reduce as new craft come online. That might be what we see in terms of nominal station operations. But the interesting part when we start looking at Axiom missions, and especially when Axiom starts launching their modules to add to the station here in 2024, 2025, is we might see an increase in cargo resupply craft to outfit those modules once they're launched, and to then also start doing like dedicated month-long, okay, an Axiom crew is going to go up, and we need like a Cygnus or a Dragon to go up with all of the experiments that that crew will do in addition to what the ISS crew is doing on the other side, basically, of the hatch. So we might start seeing differences in those types of resupply flights as the station expands here coming up.
And the other important thing too is that each of these resupply vehicles is slightly different and has slightly different capabilities, especially when it comes to science. So, for
Mhm.
example, the Cargo Dragon is the only one right now that has down mass, meaning you can bring experiments or supplies or something back down to Earth. And along those same lines, you have Cygnus, which can then act as its own sort of orbital laboratory once it undocks from the ISS, and you can perform other experiments on there in the couple days before that burns up on reentry.
And that's the other thing to mention about Cygnus really, really quick is once it attaches to the ISS, it can basically become an additional science module for the ISS. And in fact, some of the experiments that Cygnus brings up that don't stay on the station, they don't have to transfer out of Cygnus anymore to run. And even though they have to be at the ISS to be performed, they can stay within the Cygnus module and the crew can do them there because of how Northrop Grumman has adapted Cygnus over the years.
All right. I'm going to keep the questions rolling here. We're coming up on T-minus 22 minutes right now. Everything on track for an on-time liftoff. There's no 20-minute vent on this rocket, so we won't be pointing that out. But we do have a question here from Robert saying that it's raining here in Northern Virginia, headed towards Wallops. Is there any weather threat for today's launch? Do we have any updates as to the weather forecast for this morning?
The last I saw from NASA, the weather was 80% go, with the only main concern being the possibility that some low clouds in the area from a frontal system that is approaching, but certainly not there yet. It could violate the low cloud ceiling rule, but we are not seeing an indication of that so far. So keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that, obviously, and relay that if anyone reports that there's a weather issue. But it seems like weather is cooperating for this morning's launch so far. I'm going to keep questions coming here. Also, want to keep thanking Super Chats and stuff. Steven, thank you for becoming a PadRat member. Much appreciated.
But we should note on that one, we were just discussing weather, but we should note that there are they are discussing over the comnets with Northrop Grumman. There are issues being worked, and at present, Northrop Grumman is in a no-go condition for liftoff here 21 minutes from now. So again, right now, teams are working an issue and we are no go for liftoff 21 minutes from now. And there's a 5-minute launch window, so 26 minutes until they would have to be off the ground for today.
Yeah, I'm gonna look into see if I can figure out what exactly that issue was. I don't think we caught that, but some issue or issues being worked by the launch team right now. 20 minutes to go, and currently in a no-go configuration, but we will stand by on that. In the meantime, we can keep taking some questions though, and Nick has one about how does NASA feel about both of their CRS contracts flying on one launcher, Falcon 9, referring to the 3 missions that Cygnus will be flying on Falcon 9 between Antares 230 and Antares 330.
Ooh,
Well,
that's a good
go
one.
ahead, Sawyer. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the beauty of this commercial resupply services contract is that you have that redundancy in terms of the different spacecraft as well as the different rockets in which they launch on. But you do have the benefit with Cygnus in that it is probably one of the most adaptable cargo vehicles out there, that it has flown on the older version of Antares. It has flown on an Atlas. It will be flying on a Falcon 9. So it's I know it's always a risk, but this is a very adaptable vehicle too.
Yeah, the fact that Falcon 9 is also a very reliable launch vehicle is a benefit here and probably eases some of the concern. It is certainly not ideal. It is certainly not what NASA wanted, but it is also, we need to say, an absolute direct knock-on effect to the retirement of the Atlas V rocket, because when Antares had its previous failure, Northrop Grumman moved 2 resupply missions over to the Atlas V, and part of the initial bid for the CRS-2 round of contracts were larger variants of Cygnus that could carry more cargo but required the Atlas V to be launched on, but there are no more Atlas Vs for them to launch to buy, because Amazon took the rest of them for the Kuiper constellation. So that when we realized Antares 230 was going to have to be retired after the Russian invasion, I mean, I think everyone called it instantly, looking at Falcon 9 going, well, that's the only rocket there is, and that's their only
Right.
choice, and that's exactly what they had to go with because of that. But even Northrop Grumman is talking about wanting to get the Antares 330 with the Firefly Aerospace first stage up and running as quickly as possible. because they want to put that redundancy back in place for two different launch systems. They obviously want to launch their own vehicle, but they want to get that redundancy back in place as quickly as possible.
Right, there you go. Great, thank you, Chris. Let's see what other questions we're getting here. Coming up on 18 minutes, and again, still listening out for an update on whatever the issue being worked is. But the countdown is proceeding so far. Like we said, we only have a 5-minute window here. And it has, you know what? We should also mention that, especially on the last launch, Northrop Grumman has definitely worked through issues at the last minute in these countdown and gotten these missions off. So no reason to be overly concerned yet, but just need to figure out what exactly they're working and if they'll be able to resolve it in time.
Indeed. Oh, and it's also worth noting that when Dream Chaser joins as the next commercial resupply
Yes.
vehicle as well, its launch vehicle is Vulcan. So ideally, Cygnus launches on Antares, Dragon launches on Falcon 9, and Dream Chaser launches on the Vulcan rocket. That is the ideal spread of launch vehicles for the three U.S. resupply vehicles.
That's an extra bit of redundancy, even.
And weather has improved to 90% favorable, so that's good. So it's not the weather
That's
that's
good.
being worked.
Yep, all right, that's a good sign. I have another question. This one actually comes from our own back channel. An NSF reporter by the name of Adrian wants to know if, in the event of a mission failure or even just a delay, especially since we're talking about an issue being worked today, how long is the margin as far as like food and other essential supplies for the crew? Should a resupply mission not be able to reach the ISS for any reason?
Yeah, so the last couple of times I have asked this question to NASA, it hasn't even been food. That's the limiting consumable, is what it's called. On board, it's actually been the carbon dioxide scrubber systems and the filters that are needed for those. But in general, there's usually nowadays there's usually about 8 to 10 months of food and water rations aboard the International Space Station. So losing one resupply vehicle usually impacts the science operations on board the ISS, but nothing else at this point.
There you go. And
They've done a really, really good job of stockpiling the ISS after the shuttle
yes.
program. Yeah.
Yeah, I recall back in the day, their goal is to always have at least 6 months worth of supplies up there as backup.
Alrighty, and just relaying another little thing, there will be a 5-minute hold at the T-minus 11-minute mark here, which would basically set up for a launch at the end of the window, if they can resolve the technical issues here, which would set up for a new T0 no earlier than 5:55 AM Eastern Standard Time, 10:55 UTC. Again, that being the end of the 5-minute launch window today, which is what would set them up for.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you for the update, Chris. I'll keep questions coming in the meantime. And Johan says, how is the orbit to the ISS affected when launches from Wallops compared to the Kennedy Space Center?
And that's one of the things actually with the International Space Station in the specific orbit that it's in, is that it is designed essentially to pass over all of these multiple locations to allow access to the ISS. So it passes over Florida, over Wallops, over Japan, so they can launch their resupplies as well. And so when you add all of that together, it's not much different. It's just like you would do at the Cape. You plan for a window where ISS is going to be essentially directly overhead, and you launch and start chasing it. So where the ISS was placed decades ago is designed just for this very reason.
Yep, there you go. All right, I'm going to bring in another question here. Nikon's in Space says, almost sunrise, jellyfish, question mark?
Yes. Well, let's stay tuned to see if we lift off. But a possibility, a possibility today, actually, with the time change. Yes, but let's see. Let's see if we do lift off at the end of the window. But possible. Yes. Remember, Antares is a very different vehicle. I want to point out what the jellyfish might do here. Antares is a liquid-fueled first-stage vehicle that burns for about 3.5 minutes for the first part of flight. It actually does not throttle back for max Q. The engines just go at 100% once lit. And then the second stage is a solid propellant vehicle. So the jellyfish, I've never actually seen a jellyfish with solid propellant before. So I don't want to make a promise for something I haven't seen yet, but possible. Let's see if everything aligns today.
I
And
would.
you're also talking to, if it is on the first stage too, you're also only talking the RD-181s as opposed to the 9 Merlin 1Ds.
Yeah, so yeah, this will be fascinating. Let's see what it does, because you're right. The timing is perfect. The timing is almost perfect this morning with the time change. Yeah.
We will see, and we've got that T minus clock in the top left updated now for the new launch time. Again, a 5-minute delay, and the countdown clock itself will actually hold at L minus 11 or T minus 11 minutes, and then cycle back. So that clock will resync with the countdown clocks that the mission controllers are seeing once it hits the 11-minute and counting mark, assuming that they are able to release that hold as currently planned. But yeah, and you mentioned solids and jellyfish. I would think that there's got to be like an Atlas V launch at some point that was starting to jellyfish during first stage flight, and there were some solids. But I can't remember one off the top of my head, but I'm sure if we went and found one, there's at least one.
I'm sure there is. The difference here is that the Atlas solids only burn for like 90 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you're right on the Atlas core stage. Yes.
So anyway, could be an interesting spectacle. We will see. Maybe that 5-minute delay will even make it slightly better. I don't know. We'll see.
Hopefully, it is starting to get light here in Florida, so that should be cool.
Yeah. All right. Cheetah X with a super chat. It is too early in the morning for me to confidently sing those lyrics, but I do greatly appreciate the Down with the Cygnus reference. Much appreciated.
What? Yeah.
Yep, there you go. Thank you, Chris.
That was me.
Oh, that was Sawyer. Thank you, Sawyer.
Yeah,
You're
Sawyer.
welcome. Oh no, I don't want people to think Chris did that terrible version.
Bringing in some views from some NASA feeds as well. Now I got an up close view with the business end of Antares there. But anyway, I'll keep the questions coming. Ben Fields asks, do NASA resupply missions also resupply the Russian cosmonauts and Roscosmos with supplies and vice versa?
There usually are things for each side on the various craft, not always though. There have been some progresses that have launched without NASA equipment on them. And there have definitely been some US resupply missions that have launched without stuff for the Russian side. But the vehicles are capable of launching those other things. Although there are diplomatic
Hey, really quick, Chris.
info.
I'm going to jump in and interrupt this question. Sorry about that. There have been a scrub called for today, and a 24-hour recycle is going to be made on today's Antares and Cygnus mission. There was a fire alarm at the Cygnus Mission Control Center, and that is going to cause a stand down from today's mission. That is an official update from NASA.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Yep. Well,
That's a new one to add to your list of reasons for scrub. Boat, plane, cloud, now fire alarm.
It is, but it's also something that, I don't want to bring this to another rocket, but it's germane to what we're talking about here. If you think back to some of the Falcon 9 launches, you sometimes hear the launch director brief the team on what to do in the event that a fire alarm goes off in the launch control center during the terminal count, and what do you do? And basically, like they say, like, critical console operators stay on console as we assess, everyone else evacuate. But yeah, you don't take fire alarms lightly, and if there was an actual issue, of course we hope everyone at the Cygnus control center is safe, and that's the ultimate purpose, right? Keep the crews safe, and that is a new one on us here for scrubbing, but you got to keep the ground crews safe, not just the rockets safe when you're trying to lift a mission like this off.
Yeah, putting it on your screen, kind of left-hand side of your screen, we can see some extra activity from the tank farm. I believe that is indicative of the scrub and the ground systems basically preparing to start detanking the first stage of Antares, given the abort. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on. Hopefully, the fire alarm is something minor and no one was hurt or anything.
Yeah,
But
that appears like it's just excess fuel burn off or as it's venting out, and
mhm.
that is not the reason for the fire alarm. That is out at the
Right,
launch
no,
pad, which is expected. This
yes,
is
yes, yes,
different from the fire alarm inside the launch control center.
yes. The fire alarm is back at Mission Control. But yeah, so we do. There is a 24-hour recycle, like most ISS launches. It's approximately 24 hours. I'll have to go back. We'll get the exact T0 for tomorrow's attempt, unless one of you has it in front of you. It'll be tomorrow morning. Will be the time for the next attempt.
Yeah, I was just trying to look for that, and I don't see it
Okay, we will.
quite
Maybe
yet.
NASA might not even have published it, but it'll be
Uh,
somewhere around 5:30 or something in the morning, Eastern
y-
time.
yeah, launch times typically move about 22 to 24 minutes earlier each day for the ISS.
But I think that's going to prompt us to start wrapping up our coverage here. Really quick, Jerwa offered another super chat, and I do want to thank that amount of support. That is very generous, and we do appreciate that. Just to recap, everyone, due to a fire alarm at the Cygnus Mission Control Center, Northrop's Mission Control Center, not at the pad or anything, but at the building where the launch controllers are looking at the Cygnus vehicle, the teams had to evacuate that center, and thus the launch is going to have to be scrubbed for this morning. And they are setting up for a recycle tomorrow morning, 24 hours from now. And we'll stand by for the coverage plan and the exact T0 and everything for that from NASA. Hopefully, nothing too serious affecting the teams over in Dulles, Virginia. But otherwise, the rocket and the vehicle all appeared healthy, and hopefully they'll be ready to go tomorrow morning. I'll go around the horn and thank the team for offering some coverage this morning. Chris Gebhardt, assistant managing editor of NASASpaceflight. Chris Gebhardt, thanks for hopping on this morning.
My pleasure indeed. Not to be for Antares this morning, but we'll be back tomorrow when they are ready to see this mission off to the ISS.
Absolutely. Sawyer Rosenstein was also on commentary and offering some questions and things. So thank you so much, Sawyer.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a busy time. We've got another Antares attempt tomorrow, then there's a launch on Tuesday, so it's keeping busy in a very good way.
Absolutely. I also want to give a big thank you to our good friend Pat, who is out there operating this camera for us today. So, Pat, thank you so much for rolling out this morning and providing the camera view. We'll keep in touch. But thank you so much for rolling out bright and early. Also want to thank our production team again, both Michael Baylor and Kevin, offering some production for us this morning. So thanks for the production team for making that happen. And then that is it. So my name is Thomas Burkhardt. I am wrapping up our NASA Spaceflight live coverage of today's attempt, and we will stay tuned to see what the plan is for tomorrow, hopefully another launch attempt. But that is going to do it for our coverage this morning. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
chamber pressure looks good.
Traveling up. Rock and roll with Linus.
Water towers, fly!
Echo Delta nominal.
Flight SE off. Say again, SE off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.